probability of an error per strand, and it's the same in the enzymatic and the non-enzymatic case.
I see.
But if you want to tell us what that should be, we can change that because it's an important thing, right?
Yeah.
So presumably a ribozyme could be more accurate than the non-enzymatic thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to, well, it helps in one sense. I mean, it helps the ribosome to spread when it arises. Right?
Yeah, it can only be helpful, I guess. I guess, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But then the question is, how bad is it beforehand? So one thing I think is interesting is the fact that if you have the non-enzymatic template-directed stuff before the life comes along, then you created a population of sequences that are similar to one another even before the life comes along. So when the first replicator comes along, it's already in the presence of sequences which are similar to it and which are complementary to it. So it's like people always say, well, you know, we can wait for one very rare event to create the first replicator, but we don't want to wait for multiple rare events, right? So really you need one rare event because the one thing creates a little patch of sequences that are similar to one another, which get going. That's kind of the idea I'm thinking of now.
Yeah, that was really cool. If you want numbers, I guess the numbers I've read in the literature for non-enzymatic polymerization might be like error rates between 7 and 25% per base. So then depending on how long it is, I guess you can calculate. And then for enzymatic, Peter might know better, but maybe like 1 to 3%, something like that.
Right, I missed the start of the conversation, but the
error rates for ribosome catalyzed.
It's really, really quiet. I have to focus really hard to hear everybody speaking.
So Irene pointed out that the error rate for the ribosome catalyzed reactions would be less than the non-enzymatic thing, and we were talking about putting that into a theory, basically.
Yeah, I mean the error rates for the polymerases that are artificially evolved are fairly high, right? They're multiple percent. So yeah. And it depends on the nucleotide triphosphate concentration.
So,
yeah,
I mean, the other part, sorry, I was going to say, if the error rate is large, then you also have to take into account the fact that there's more than one sequence that can do it, right? And the fact that not every base is critical to the function, right? In other words, it's a neutral network, if you know what I mean. So that gets you back a bit. I mean, big error rates make it worse, but neutral networks make it better again, to some extent.
Yeah. A lot of unknowns. Yeah.
I wonder if we can't start, at least begin to start our afternoon session. We still need Dave and Nick to get online here. And
Harry.
And Ron.
I am on. I just muted.
People are showing up. Good. We need Nick and Ron, I think.
Harry, this is Nick Hyde.
It looks like Niles and Paul clicked off, and Rom's not yet. Let's give it another second or so, Dave.
On screen, you want to do that?
I think everybody's on now, Harry.
I don't have Niles and Paul or Nick. Sorry. Nick, you're on.
Well, I think that's just the status of their microphone. The X means it's muted, I think.
And I'm going to turn my microphone off as well, I think.
Yeah, Harry, we just muted temporarily.
Dave, can you hear me?
So shall I start?
David, you can hear me. I think you're on.
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, you're on.
Okay. I'm pulling up my PowerPoint now.
Sorry, Dave, you're a bit faint.
Faint in terms of voice?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm closer to the screen now. Does that help?
I can't hear you, Dave, very well.
Well, this is about as good as I can do, I think.
Okay.
Are you ready to go? Can everybody hear me? I need some feedback. Is everybody hearing me?
I hear you.
Yes.
I can hear you, David, but you're quite faint.
Yeah, I'll talk as loud as I can here. I'm not sure where it is. Someplace on the desktop. Okay, so as most of you know, we've been trying to. Sorry, is somebody commenting? As most of you know, we've been trying to guide our laboratory research by looking at field conditions of hydrothermal sites around the world. This has included places like Iceland and Kamchatka, Hawaii, and Northern California, where we have a research site that you'll see. The reason for that is that we're reasonably confident that the Earth, the prebiotic Earth, maybe 4 billion years ago, was in fact a volcanic hydrothermal environment. The temperature was probably in the range of 60 to 70 degrees taken from estimates of the kinds of minerals that were being laid down at that time. The atmosphere was anoxic. It was mostly nitrogen with a little bit of an admixture of carbon dioxide. There was active volcanism, both submarine and in these volcanoes that were rising out of the ocean. The ocean was probably salty, perhaps even more so than today, if you believe Paul Canal down at Arizona State. And finally, if you have volcanic land masses, that means that you have the ability to have precipitation, and there would have been freshwater ponds, so that we're not stuck with a salty submarine site for the origin of life. We can also think about freshwater ponds, which would be in fact analogous to the sorts of hydrothermal sites that we see on today's volcanoes. So we certainly take as a reasonable idea that the earliest forms of life were much simpler. They could have used RNA both as a catalyst and as a way to store and replicate genetic information, but the RNA world is likely composed of what we now call thermophilic microorganisms, just because of the environment of the time. So the hypothetical scenario that we are working off of is that, number one, there must have been a non-enzymatic process by which potentially catalytic and replicating polymers were produced to initiate these steps toward the first forms of life. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. The polymers would be encapsulated in membranous compartments by self-assembly to form what we call protocells. We demonstrated this years ago, and Jack Szostak has been leading a very nice research effort showing how protocells can be used as a kind of an evolutionary version of early life. Those compartments, the way I look at it, is that they are microscopic experiments in a natural version of combinatorial chemistry. A few of them, a rare few, happen to contain systems of polymers that could catalyze their own reproduction. And you've heard some computer modeling of this sort of rare event that in fact would lead to a growth of a catalytic molecule. Finally, these would be selected by competition to evolve toward the first cellular life, and I'm going to refer to this paper by Adamala and Szostak, recently came out, who showed in fact that there can be a selection and competition among protocells in a laboratory system. So where could this have all happened? One idea first proposed by John Barros and taken up by Mike Russell, Bill Martin, and Nick Lane, is that hydrothermal vents are a possible site for the origin of life. I don't think that's the most plausible choice myself. The reason is there's a huge hydrothermal, a vast thermodynamic barrier to getting condensation reactions to work in a aqueous environment. And second, you have this problem of dispersion. Anything that is there is going to diffuse out into the medium unless you have some sort of a compartment. And Mike Russell and Bill Martin have suggested this could be sort of mineral cells, and they're working along that line. But I think a more plausible alternative hydrothermal site are the sorts of places that we have been visiting in these various volcanic regions around the world. These would be the equivalent of Darwin's warm little pond, but in fact I would call them hot little puddles because they are in fact pretty hot. If you're interested, there's a recent paper by Mokajanian, Origin of First Cells at Terrestrial Anoxic Geothermal Fields in PNES 2012, and he's explored the possibility of this kind of a site from his perspective. We looked at Bumpus Hill, which is just a few hours drive north of us on the banks of the slopes of Mount Lassen. And you look down at this, and it's really quite extraordinary to think to yourself that this is a possible site for the origin of life 4 billion years ago. So what are the properties of this kind of a site? One is that there is extensive clay. So if you want clays, this is where you can go. You also have relatively high temperatures. This particular one is about 90 degrees C at about 8,000 feet altitude. They're usually low pH, around 2 to 3 because of dissolved sulfur compounds in the water. There are also wet-dry cycles, which I think are very important for reasons that you'll begin to see. And these occur at the edges of these ponds as the water levels go up and down. For instance, right up in here, it's pretty dry. Down in here, it's pretty wet. And you can imagine that with precipitation and other sorts of events that this water comes in and out of those wet-dry cycles. So we're going to try to simulate that in the laboratory. The reason is that we think that those sites have a set of favorable properties. First of all, organic compounds will accumulate there. This would not happen in the ocean really. The ocean would disperse these sorts of compounds, very dilute solutions. Here at least you have a chance for the organic compounds to accumulate. Second is that the wet-dry cycles concentrate potential reactants. Again, that would not occur in a marine environment. There are no wet-dry cycles. Third is that if you reduce water activity, you can pull water out as a leaving group under some conditions and thereby produce condensation reactions, leading to polymerization. Elevated temperature provides activation energy. And finally, if you have amphiphilic molecules there, whatever products are made are captured by vesicles, and this would produce what we call protocells. So we're going to think about the kinds of reactions that might occur under those conditions. One of them, you'd all guess, is hydrolysis. Without doubt, if you have polymers there held together by ester bonds, they're going to be hydrolyzed at a certain rate, back to smaller fragments and, of course, finally monomers. On the other hand, if you can pull water out of a concentrated set of reactants, you can pull that reaction in the other direction toward polymerization. What we're really looking for, I think, is to find a steady state in which hydrolysis is balanced by condensation. The steady state is well away from equilibrium, and I remind everybody that this is the way life works. We all exist in a steady state away from equilibrium, and the reason is that our polymers or life in general, are in a kinetic trap. The uphill synthesis process is faster than the downhill spontaneous hydrolysis. None of us dissolve when we take a shower. Not much anyway. So here's our model system. We have to choose something as a reasonable model system. We've chosen 2 mononucleotides, AMP, UMP, and a mixture of AMP and UMP. And you'll see why we do that in a moment. Polymers, for the other direction, we're choosing polyadenylate acid, polyuridylate acid. We put those together in a 1-to-1 ratio, and we end up with a double-stranded dsRNA that is a poly-AU duplex. We're also going to put a little twist on the idea of the old shake and bake method for getting life started. We're going to be using organizing matrix. Two of these are these multilamellar liquid crystals. We've already published on this. The matrix guides polymerization, and the products are encapsulated to form protocells, as I pointed out. But more recently, with our French colleagues who joined this research, Marie-Christine Noël and Laura da Silva, we discovered that monovalent salt crystals also organize monomers during hydration-dehydration cycles and dramatically enhance yields of polymers. We're talking about more than 10-fold enhancement of polymers that look very much like the stuff that we get with the liquid crystals. I might add that the workers that are accompanying our team on this side of it, you've been introduced to them already, but Wenonah Vercoutere has supplied the laboratory and the Nanaport device. Veronica de Guzman is doing the Nanaport analysis, and she's being paid off of Harry's generous grant. And Hossein Shinaza, who's sitting here in the office with me, is an undergraduate researcher in his senior year, and he's learning how to do a lot of the technical stuff, and he'll be working with Wenonah and Veronica over at NASA Ames this summer. Here's the proposed mechanism that we think could go on if you have a way to bring down water activity sufficient to make water itself a leading group. You have a proton going on to the phospharyl oxygen in a nucleotide, AMP in this case, and this is acidic pH ranges. If there is a neighboring ribose on another AMP, you can undergo a nucleophilic attack on that central phosphorus. You can have a rearrangement of protons and electrons, as you can see there in the next couple of steps. You can then lose water as H2O, that's the condensation reaction. Proton comes back off, and you end up with a phosphodiester bond. And as long as you have a way to keep pulling water out of that reaction mechanism, you're going to have a synthesis of phosphodiester bonds leading to polymerization. Now we're going to test the hypothesis. We fabricated a simulation chamber. The conditions in the chamber are carbon dioxide atmosphere, mostly to keep it anaerobic, but also to pull water out of the reaction. We're using elevated temperatures similar to that of these hydrothermal sites that we've been exploring, acidic pH ranges down around pH 3, and those hydration-dehydration cycles. And we're abbreviating that HD cycles as I go on here. So this is what the chamber looks like. We built this last year. This is one of the two ways that we're doing these experiments. That's a rotating aluminum disk. It rotates 4 times in 24 hours. You have carbon dioxide leading into 4 of those little wells on each side of the disk, and you have a steady drip of water on the other 2 sides. The water comes from a syringe pump. There's a programmable syringe pump that drips the water in about half a mil per 30 minutes. There's a CO2 flux coming in, and in the next slide, you'll see what that looks like up close. Here's the dehydration cycle at 85 degrees. There's the rehydration cycle. Dehydration is driven by carbon dioxide flux. Hydration is driven by additional water, and that comes in at those outlets, and the water comes out of that outlet. So that's happening 4 times every 24 hours for 2-hour cycles. I got to show you one other thing that happens under these conditions. If you dry down an amphiphile in the presence of solute molecules, the solutes are captured between layers of a multilamellar matrix. So let's say we have some vesicles over there on the left. We have some sort of solute outside. It could be simple monomers, or it could be polymers, such as I've shown you here. You evaporate the water, you have a dehydration. The vesicles fuse through, say, the multilamellar matrix. and whatever was outside is trapped between these multilamellar structures. And so keep in mind, this is a capture. It is an organizing event. You go from a three-dimensional dilute diffusion with very high entropy. This is a lower entropy. You organize these things in a two-dimensional plane. This is a liquid crystal, so those monomers are able to diffuse within those layers that you see there. To show you that this in fact works, there are vesicles on the left in by freeze fracture microscopy. This is what lipid vesicles look like. And in ice, that's all ice outside. These are the vesicles. Here's the same material dried down. Each of those layers that you see is a single bilayer thick. And years ago, we discovered this way back in the 1980s, and we thought we knew what was happening. Suppose, for instance, that we have a nucleotide monomer, like adenosine monophosphate, as one of our test molecules. We drew a cartoon showing that these monomers are captured, as you see here, between layers of lipid. We don't have to depend on cartoons anymore because with Harry's help, I got together with Laura Topozzini and Mikhail Reinstadter at McMaster University. They have a wonderful X-ray diffraction device that shoots a beam of X-rays into a multi-layered structure that you can see here. The reflections then come off in a way that can be analyzed by the ordinary sorts of X-ray diffraction calculations. What Laura discovered, and Michael, is that a simple bilayer has this reflection as you see clear to the left. That's dimeristoyl phosphatidyl choline. So dimeristoyl is a 14-carbon saturated fatty acid that produces that very simple diffraction pattern. As soon as you add AMP in these ratios, 1 to 2, 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, you begin to see these extra reflections, which are indicative of the semi-crystalline arrays, two-dimensional arrays of the AMP between those layers. So they really nailed it. We now know for a fact that AMP assembles into two-dimensional crystals within these lipid lamellae. Furthermore, they went on to analyze at near atomic resolution where this stuff was. And the phosphate is right next to the ribose in this particular structure, so that water can easily come off, leaving behind an ester bond, according to that reaction mechanism I showed you. So here's an experiment. We're going to put in either AMP or UMP, not a mixture yet, with a lipid or salt. I'm going to show you some very new results that are unpublished. Low pH, multiple wet-dry cycles in our cycling device that you saw. We're going to get polymeric products. We spin them down either through a spin tube isolation that is supposed to isolate RNA, the specialized spin tube, or by the usual ethanol precipitation. We're then going to analyze by ordinary gel electrophoresis or by nanopore analysis. Now, we were doing these experiments over 5 years ago. We published this paper in 2008. This is the first paper demonstrating that polymers are synthesized. We radioactively labeled the products as though they were RNA. We used alkaline phosphatase to break a terminal phosphate off, the usual T4 kinase and ATP32 to make a polymer with a radioactive phosphate on it. And everything you see here is radioactively labeled polymers in a gel behaving as though it is a version of RNA. We call this an RNA-like molecule because it probably has both 3,5 and 2,5 linkages in it. But notice how long it is. It goes all the way from down the 20 mer range, clear up to the 100 mer range, with most of them in this 50 mer range. We try different temperatures. Here's just room temperature, nothing happens, 60 degrees, 70 degrees, 90 degrees. Over here, we try different lipids. You leave lipid out, no reaction. You try phosphatidyl phosphatidic acid, isophosphatidyl one chain missing. And that's really interesting because this happened to produce a ladder. So whenever you see a ladder, that means you're on the right track. is a scan of that ladder going from about 10 MERS up to over 25 MERS. And if you know what this means, it really suggests that we are making basically a polymer of AMP increasing by single nucleotides in these steps that you see here. So that was pretty convincing. And when Harry's challenge came along, I felt that this is time for us to do a little bit more work on this. So one of the ways that we are analyzing this stuff, I got to bring you up to date on this, is to use what's called a nanoport. This is what Veronica is doing at NASA Ames in Wenonah's laboratory. We're using the hemolysin nanopore, and we've basically been developing this technique over the last 20 years now, so we know a lot about it. What we do know is that you put a voltage across the nanopore, that single strands of nucleic acid can be captured in the nanopore and pulled through. And while they're in the nanopore, they block ionic current, and we can read that ionic current blockade with a sensitive picoammeter. So here's the open channel with nothing in it. You have a free flux of potassium and chloride, maybe 120 picoamps of ionic current. But as soon as a single-stranded nucleic acid passes through, we see a blockade. Every one of these blockades over here is one of our polymers passing through a hemolysin nanopore. Here's an UMP with POPC, 7 cycles. Here's AMP with phosphatidic acid, POPA. By the way, this is what John Sutherland was making that he talked about. It's a version of POPA. Again, nice blockades. Here's one where you have all 4 monomers together. Again, nice blockades. What you want to notice about these blockades is the amplitude. These go all the way down to nearly full blockades and then range up to maybe 20 or 30% blockades. There's a few of these. Most of them look like this. Also look at the duration, just a millisecond or so in length. There's 1 millisecond. This is a long one, 10 milliseconds. Most of them in this range, in the 1 to 3 millisecond range. So keep that in mind because we're going to look at this again in a little bit later. So the conclusions are, addition of a self-assembling lipid matrix organizes mononucleotides within that matrix, produces condensation reactions, and seemingly makes RNA-like polymers. When you rehydrate, the polymers are encapsulated with lipid vesicles. I didn't show that, but that's in our paper. Now then, this is new. What if we have base pairing monomers in that same mix? What if we put in AMP and UMP? We noticed early on that yields were increased if we had both AMP and UMP. So let's think about what happens as a mixture dries down. We're here, up here on the left, we have a dilute solution. We have evaporate, becomes a concentrated solution. It gets caught between the lipid bilayers. Either we have separate two-dimensional crystals of A and U, or we might have a mixed crystal where they've all sort of gotten into some crystalline array together, or we have what I call a mixed glass, where we have sort of a random array of polymers, and these are hydrogen bonded. They're hydrogen bonded because they're very concentrated, and this is a low energy configuration of what A and U do before they become hardened into either a glass or a crystal. If you have that, and you can make water become a leading group, we have a chance of making duplex RNA. So that's what we're after now. Does that really happen? First thing that we discovered is that double-stranded RNA, a known double-stranded RNA, does withstand these wet dry cycles. And Krishnamurthy asked about this. He said, does RNA stand up to this? Well, this is a standard that we use, the double-stranded RNA, poly-AU, one-stranded A, one-stranded poly-U. And look at these gels. They range from 100 mer to about 300 mer, and they do pretty well. These are long cycles, at 85C, pH 3, and they do pretty well. You get a little bit of a loss. You can see it here in the quantitative analysis. And by the way, these are now inverted gel images. We're using a fluorescent dye, ethidium bromide, to stain this polyanillic or poly-AU in the gel. So it's really fluorescence shows up as dark against a light background in these inverted images. This is very important. Only double-stranded RNA finds this intercalating dye called ethidium. Here's poly-A up to 2 micrograms in the gel. You don't see anything. Here's poly-U in the gel. You don't see anything. If you mix these together, let them form a double-stranded species. Look at this. Now the ethidium combines and intercalates into that double-stranded structure, and we can see the fluorescence. The reason that's important is our product strand, under these conditions, picks up ethidium bromide. There you can see it. These are the sort of long, many strand lengths all the way from probably 30 mers down to here, up into the 200 mer range up here. Notice also that this occurs at low pH ranges, but not at high pH ranges, as predicted from that mechanism. And here's a scan showing how this works. So what I got from this, when we first began to see this, is that maybe we were having double-stranded species being produced when both AMP and UMP were present. So I showed this to Marie-Christine Louvel and her student, Laura Da Silva, and they got very interested in this. And so Marie-Christine is a specialist in RNA biochemistry, and we published together before about 10 years ago, so we have a collegial relationship. So they discovered that different salts also promote polymerization. Let me just show you one of the salts that we're going to talk about is ammonium chloride, and here's cycling again, 2 cycles, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What you'll see here is we have apparently 2 kinds of RNA being produced. We got this down here in the 20 to 30 mer range. We have the stuff up here, much longer, way up into the 300 mer range. It does take cycling, because if you look over here to the right, this is a 4-hour single cycle. That's the same amount of time as this 8 cycles of half an hour each. So you can see the cycling really does help whatever it's doing. Now here are 4 different salts. It's very important. Potassium chloride, sodium chloride, lithium chloride, ammonium chloride. No lipid now. Only these salts in about a 10 to 1 ratio with respect to the monomers present. So you can see 8 cycles and 12 cycles with KCl, 8 and 12 with sodium chloride. Look at this. Lithium chloride does not promote the reaction. We think the reason is that lithium is a highly hydrated cation, and it brings down so much water, even as it dries down, that the condensation reaction cannot occur when we're with the lithium chloride. For some reason we don't understand, ammonium chloride is the champion. We're getting up to 30% yield of polymers based on the original monomers present. Whereas the lipids, we were down to the 1% range. Very significantly, if you treat with RNase, whatever this polymer is, and here's one of these 4 and 8 cycles without RNase afterwards, you see the full 30, 40 mers and 300 mers. Look at that. The 300 mers are completely gone, and the 30 to 40 mers are largely hydrolyzed as well. So we're pretty sure that we have what everybody, I think, would call an RNA-like molecule being produced under these conditions. Summarizing, cycling increases yields. Ammonium chloride is the most effective promoter of this reaction. RNase digests the product. So now I'm going to show you why we think these salts might be working. The reason is that we think they're doing something like the lipid did. Here is a phase micrograph image at 160 times, relatively low magnification, of that thin film of ammonium chloride plus AMP and UMP on the bottom of this little reaction vessel. So this is the actual conditions of polymerization. What we did over here is to include Irene 100 micromolar as a fluorescent dye to show us where the AMP and the UMP end up. Everything you see there is fluorescence. As you can see, the dye, and we assume the AMP and UMP, ends up in little thread-like structures, highly concentrated, excluded by the crystals of ammonium chloride. You can see little nodules of dye built into these threads. So we think that the crystals are doing something like the lipid does, but even better. Somehow they're promoting polymerization in a very efficient way, particularly for unknown reasons, ammonium chloride. Okay, whatever the products are, they have hyperchromicity. There's a couple of experiments, one with lipid and one with ammonium chloride enhancement. This level of hyperchromicity in this TM, transition temperature range, is equivalent to about a 15 Ur. So when you see this kind of melting curve in RNA. So it's as though there are regions in those much longer strands that seem to have a little bit of duplex structure that does in fact melt and show hyperchromicity as expected. Getting back to the nanopores, we were surprised by the signals we were getting. Instead of long, deep blockades, we got lots of short, not long deep. Instead of short, deep blockades, we got a whole bunch of much longer blockades of only about 25%. Each one of these dots you see in that top panel is a single molecule of our product going through the nanopore. You can see there's just hundreds up there in that 25 Ur range, ranging from around a millisecond all the way up to nearly 100 milliseconds in length. This is what they look like. Here's a relatively long lived event. Here is a relatively short lived event, a little spike at the end, and that's significant. There's another short lived event with a spike at the end, and a whole set of other short lived events you can see. So all of these that I'm pointing to now would be up in this range. Okay? Now what about that little spike? We know from past work that when a double-stranded DNA enters the pore, it gets caught in the vestibule of the pore and then unzips, leaving behind a spike. So those two that I showed you, in fact, fit what we understand about nanopore blockades of double-stranded material. What we don't understand is why we don't always see the spike in all of these. We think that these might be sufficiently short strands so that our instrument does not have enough resolving power, temporal resolving power. So let us see all of these little downward spikes. So that's one of the things that we want to try to work out. Okay, I'm just about done. We did one atomic force microscopy so far. This is just on freshly split mica. You see lots and lots of little globs. They're down in the size range you expect for about 100 Ur. They should be about 30 nanometers long. And most of these little blobs that you see would be in that range. Occasionally they look like they kind of line up. We don't know what all that means yet, but this is not terribly surprising what we're seeing with atomic force. Finally, we have done one run with an electrospray mass spectrometry. Our future plan is to do this with MALDI as well. This is comparing our product, which is, this is the HPLC. You see the product comes off at this, just about the same retention time as one of these poly-AU duplex species. They are not well separated on this particular column. At least they come off at the same time. When we sample the curve right at that peak, it looks like this. And it's really quite extraordinary. The poly-AU is virtually indistinguishable from our product in terms of the kinds of peaks that we see in here. And when you analyze the distances between these peaks, they fit what you would expect of a double-stranded material of varying duplex chain length. We have a lot more to do with this. We're consulting experts with MASPECT, which we are not yet. We're trying to get a little more expertise, but that's also our next year's work, is to really get at this with MALDI and electrospray MASPECT, which we have here. So the preliminary evidence, I emphasize we consider this preliminary. It's nothing's nailed down yet. but it does look like neither A and P by themselves produce a product that can be stained with intercalating dye, but our product does seem to intercalate a iridium at least. The polymer does not exhibit hyperchromicity that's just A and P or just U and P. When you mix them together, we do get a very clear evidence of hyperchronicity, as though we were melting double-stranded chains. The products do show nanopore blockades that are not characteristic of single-stranded polymers, but do match what we know about double-stranded species. With lower amplitude, much longer duration, and that's what we think is the best explanation. Well, our next step is complicated, because as soon as you allow yourself to think about double-stranded products, it really gets very complex. Not just chain length, but also the idea that we have these randomers with duplex blunt-ended, single overhangs on either end, partial duplexes of fragments sticking together, and even occasional hairpin. We happen to match up the ends of those things. So we got to sort that out. And we think the way to do that is to go further into our mass spectrometry analysis. We can find one of those that is a predominant product, then we might be able to pull it out by a good HPLC followed by mass spec. Okay, finally, let me point out something from a paper that occurred 60 years ago that you all well know. Watson and Crick said that has not escaped their notice that this is a copy mechanism. It certainly has not escaped our notice either. But if we can make double-stranded RNA and get it to kind of get some template replication going, have initial evidence that might work, then we're really on to something that will let this stuff evolve. Okay, that is the next question. How can we get it to evolve? And Jack Szostak's research group has given us a tremendous head start on this. Way back in 1990, and Ellington and Szostak published this wonderful paper showing that you can get RNA molecules to evolve by putting in a sort of selective hurdle. Bartel and Szostak then showed that they can isolate new ribozymes from random sequences. We think that's the way to go, except we're going to do it with protocells instead of just sequences in solution. Finally, this very fine recent paper with Adamala and Szostak showing that you can actually get competition between model protocells driven by an encapsulated catalyst. I can imagine ways in which these RNAs that we're making, all three teams, in fact, can help along a kind of a model protocell, compete with others. And that's the way to go. That's what I have to tell you today.
Dave, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Shall we open it up to questions and comments?
I have a question for David. This is Peter.
Let me turn off my.
You can hear me?
Not yet. Wait a second. I'm trying to find my my WebEx again. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
You can?
I can. Yes, I can hear you.
So I don't have my full WebEx now for some reason. So as long as you can hear me, I'm happy.
Okay. So I was curious if you've tried other forms of mononucleotides than the RNA, and whether you've tried the DNA or 3' phosphates, for example.
We haven't tried 3' phosphates yet. I think that's very definitely something we have to try at least. But we have tried G+C. That does not seem to work very well, most probably because G is well known to form these complicated quadruplexes and so forth. That's going to inhibit its ability to enter into these sorts of reactions. And yet, in our earlier week, we had all four present, and that seemed to produce a product. It might be that we're diluting out the sort of self-assembly of GMP, itself. And if it's diluted out, it might be able to enter into this reaction. We have gone to deoxyribonucleotides with Felix Olasigasti. We have one paper in Biochimie in 2011 showing that if we put in a DNA template with deoxyribonucleotides, we seem to get sequence information transferred from the template to the products. It's not very believable yet. I think that we have a lot more to do to make it convincing, but at least we have some preliminary encouraging results.
Thank you.
Hey, I have a couple of questions. This is Ram.
Yeah, hi Ram.
Yeah. You showed this hyperchromicity slide where you showed there is this. Can you go? Can you open up the slide easily, or?
Let me see if I can get.
Yeah, it's the Lonsdale talk that you have as the PowerPoint. If you can actually go to the slide view, you can just click on that slide and then go to the PowerPoint. It's further down.
Okay, now, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, which slide?
The slide with the hyperchromicity.
Okay, just a minute.
Yeah, that's the one, number 33.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you, so I assume the y-axis is showing the absorbance.
That's right, A260.
That's right, on both graphs.
Yes.
Now, so if you calculate the percent hyperchromicity between these two, you know, it is the absorbance minus the minimum absorbance divided by the absorbance, minimum times 100. The percent hyperchromicity, at least from my calculations based on these graphs, comes to be close to 2% or 2.5% or at the maximum 4%.
That's right. A full RNA has more hyperchromicity than this. For instance, I put in ribosome RNA.
Yeah. For example, even at a 12-mer level, you know, the hyperchromicities are generally around 25 to 30%.
That's right. So
or even more, you know.
Much less hyperchromicity than you would get from a known RNA.
So, can you comment on that, because that, you know, is not very convincing in terms of arguing for a polymer.
Yeah, I think that what that indicates is just the point you make, that only some of these strands that we know are there from other, well, just A260 for example, only some of them have hyperchromicity, and we're seeing partial exhibition of hyperchromicity as well as, of course, partial intercalation of these dyes. It's not as though these are fully duplex RNA.
I see. And then can you go to your MASPECT data that you showed?
Yeah.
You know, I had to magnify it in my computer to see the values. But do you see any values that would correspond to either a monomer of A or a polymer of A, you know, monomer of U in that? Because for me it was very difficult to see if there was any monomers corresponding to an AMP or a UMP. And when you say poly AU, what lengths are you talking about? You know, for example, the standard that you have in the HPLC there. Is it a 15-mer or a 12-mer? Do you know?
Yeah, the poly AU that goes in is ranges from 100 to 300 mer. So keep in mind that these are commercial poly A, commercial poly U, simply mixed together in a 1-to-1 base ratio. And we seem to lose a lot of the single-stranded stuff, and this breaks down to a stable duplex in that 100 to 300 range, just by the fact that we put it together. And that's what shows up on the gels.
Yeah, and so what about the mass? Because the masses are 507, 348, 980, 1295. Do you see any higher peaks? Because when you say poly A in terms of 100 mers, how do you even get to these lower mass values?
These are all N per Z on the x-axis, mass per charge. That's why we want to go to MALDI. This is really, we can't really say much more than, yeah, they look alike. It's encouraging that we get the same sort of a mass spec. But MALDI is right the next thing we're going to do, like following what Michael Aldersley has suggested in that regard, because he's done some MALDI of his clay catalyzed polymers. So that's where we are with the mass spec, is to get to MALDI and see whether we can't see some of these actual molecular ions.
Other, Dave, are you finished with your response?
I am, yeah.
Are there other comments, questions?
I would make a comment about the ammonia. So it's been known for a long time, since the 60s, that ammonia in dry, because these are dry heating experiments, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been known since the 60s that ammonia can facilitate the phosphoryl transfer of phosphomonoesters in dry heating experiments, and that's thought to occur by loss of ammonia, or loss of ammonia from ammonium, which actually is thought to increase the acidity of localized areas where the ammonia is lost. I don't know if that plays a significant part in these experiments and the amplification that you apparently see in the presence of ammonia rather than sodium or potassium.
Yeah, that's a good point. What we've done to test that idea, keep in mind that we are starting at pH 3. Everything is adjusted to an acidic pH range, including the ammonium chloride. So most of the ammonia is as NH4+. Got very little ammonia there. What we've done is to put ammonium chloride.
Sorry, but the loss doesn't have to be from ammonia. You can lose it from ammonium, and the equilibrium is pushed by the volatilization of ammonia, which then increases the pH further. You don't actually specifically need ammonia present. You can lose it from ammonium by kind of a general base catalyzed process. All you need is something to accept the proton. For example, your phosphate.
I think the prediction of what you've just said is that there will be a pH change if we put ammonium chloride through one or more of these wet-dry cycles. When we have done that, we do not see any difference in pH after we add water back to the ammonium chloride.
It wouldn't have to be such a large change after, when it was, because then you're looking at the kind of global pH, whereas in the dry state, then you can have localized pHs that are very low relative to the global pH state. So you wouldn't necessarily know this by retesting pH, but you would see ammonia lost from the reaction. So you could condense the ammonia onto a surface, for example, and trap it. And then you could actually see the ammonia being lost, and you would know that the pH was dropping in specific locales because you've lost the base, you've lost the volatile base.
It's a good point. Could you put me on to those papers? If you'd send me just by email some references to that, and let me see what has been.
Yeah, certainly. We've used this ourselves. We've discussed this. I can.
If I could interject, this is Nick. Matt, I think you are saying exactly what David said. I mean, I think you guys are talking about almost the same thing. I want to clarify, make sure I'm clear on it. But, David, you were saying in one part of your reaction that you would have a proton come in and protonate the phosphate. I think that's exactly what Matt's saying. Matt's saying that you have the ammonium ion come in, which actually, in addition to this, what we also know is that of the different cation species, ammonium has like probably the highest affinity for phosphate groups, so it's going to stick there. And I think that what Matt's saying is that the proton would come off, go onto the phosphate, right? And then you get your, it seems like what you're going to get then, you know, Ron could correct me on the mechanism, but I think what you're going to get is you're going to get a glass of water, you're going to have your ammonia add, and you may be going through that pathway and then lose your ammonia later when it reacts further. Is that what you're talking about, Matt?
I didn't, do you, let me clarify. So you're suggesting that the actual ammonia adds to the phosphate? I'm wondering
if it does.
So I mean, potentially diamide phosphates maybe, but I wouldn't expect so at this pH. I mean, adding nitrogen and phosphorus have a low affinity relative to water, to oxygen and phosphorus. My guess is that the ammonia allows you to generate kind of the species that's on our screen, top right. So you can lose a proton to phosphate. So
absolutely, yeah, that's the first
acid catalyst. And then as you lose the ammonia to, for example, it being volatilized, you have a localized, very low pH, which allows you to access a kind of a different manifold of phosphate chemistry. If you get very low pHs, the pentavalent phosphoruses can shuffle.
Okay, yeah. So in that way, your ammonia.
I'm not suggesting David's mechanism is entirely wrong. I'm just suggesting that the ammonia might be providing a specific acid catalyst at a particular point in the reaction which might amplify what he sees with ammonia relative to sodium and potassium.
Right. I think, yeah, what you're right, the proton that he had coming in, you're saying that could be the ammonium ion coming in right there.
So, well, the ammonium ion coming in and then loss of ammonia can really drive that forwards.
Right. Leaves the proton behind. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
I like that.
And we've done quite a lot of transphosphorylations in the presence of ammonia. We used it in our 2009 paper to make mononucleotides. And if you do these in relatively long glass vials, you can see the ammonia deposit, and you can redissolve the ammonia and see that it's ammonia on the sides of the vial as you go reaction species. So I'm very confident ammonia is lost from these reactions. Or the reactions we do, which aren't exactly the same as this, but they have ammonia or ammonium chloride in and phosphates, and we see phosphodiester transesterification under somewhat similar conditions. So, I mean, hope that makes sense to particularly David. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your talk, Dave.
David, this is Ram again. I have one more clarification. You are using Phosphatidyl choline, right? LPC for all this.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the question is, are there any other non-phosphate containing substances that you could use to make and form your lamellar structures? Because the concern is whether the phosphates in your lamellar structures reacting and perhaps giving rise to some artifacts.
It is implausible that any phospholipid would be a major constituent of the prebiotic environment. Although I was impressed by John and Matt's, finding the phospholipid falls out of their reaction pathways. That's very, very nice. But we're using LPC because it comes in as micelles and forms a multilamellar structure. Again, we have Xray diffraction evidence that that's what happens. And then it's soluble. We don't have to really play around with vesicles. It just goes into and out of the multilamellar matrix structure all by itself without us promoting or making vesicles ahead of time. So that's why we're using LPC. Your larger point, though, is we would like to do this, for example, with fatty acid or some mixture of fatty acids with something else. And I think that is a very good way to go. We've tried it once with C10, C12, C14, C16 saturated fatty acids. C14 gave what looked like a product. C10 did not. Probably because it evaporates, at these pH ranges, and it's just literally a volatile species. But C14 looked like we were getting a yield that looked something like we're getting with the other liquid. So I think it's a good way to go. What your point is, let's try to get away from phosphate and the kinds of chemistry that it might be promoting. Isn't that right?
Not only that, what I'm just concerned is whether the nucleotides are interacting with the because you are making a phosphodiester bond, and with the phospholipids in there, I'm wondering whether you are getting some interference from them because they are present in such huge quantities that might be giving rise to some of the problems or artifacts that you see.
When transferred over these under these conditions to make the amount of product we're seeing. So I think it's a good point. It'll be more convincing if we can make this go without having a phosphate in around.
That's what I want to point out. Yes.
Good.
Now, just as a philosophical point, how do these results square off with what Ernest de Morrow claims, that where he just puts it in water and gets polymerization?
Yeah, Ernesto de Morrow has published that first paper, and has had extensive discussion by myself and others that have interacted with them. I visited Ernesto in his lab a couple of years ago and tried to go through it with him. He's published other papers since, and he's sticking to his guns that, in fact, this really does occur. And maybe Nick can come in and tell me what he thinks of Ernesto's more recent papers. It could be that we are making some cyclic nucleotides or maybe cyclic ends to these molecules, and that this is really an activated form that is undergoing the polymerization reaction, rather than being a simple loss of reaction, a simple loss of water, as I showed in that one mechanism that I have there. So, we just don't know enough about it yet. Nick, do you want to comment on the de Morrow later papers?
Yeah. So as you know, and maybe some of the rest of you don't know, is that we tried to reproduce those reactions in my lab, and we weren't able to. And then we saw where we think there is a source of an artifact in those experiments. I brought that to his attention, and one of the things was his result depended upon using a particular source of the AMP, which was the acid form. And so when you use the sodium form, you didn't get the results. But I think that that's because probably the two molecules are actually being prepared in a different way from the manufacturer. But I bring that point up because what he's written in the more recent papers is that sodium is inhibitory to the reaction, which is to address that point. And that I just don't understand where that's at, which is very intriguing to me to see that you're seeing these monovalents actually promote your reaction, right? And he's saying that they don't, that they inhibit them. So that's a really interesting contrast in this. So just going a little bit further on this ammonium and connecting to what you just said about the mechanism maybe being through a cyclic form, I'd like to hear what, if this is the mechanism, what you would think, and also what Matt Powner would think, what he knows about the ammonium and this phosphatyl transfer. What about this as a thought experiment to test out the mechanism? If you took a piece of DNA, and this is fit, and then you put on two pieces that had, a phosphorylated Nick site right in the middle of it, a single break in the backbone, where you would just have to make one phosphodester linkage there. Would you predict that you would be able to make that reaction happen, right? Yeah.
That goes back to Dave Usher in the 1970s. He's got a paper showing, as I recall, 2 hexamers coming down onto a 12-mer. I think it was oligo A's onto oligo U, and that bond, in fact, was produced. Do you remember that paper?
No, I embarrassingly don't. I mean, I'm thinking about his 2' 5' work, and I know he had some with amino acid moving around, but I have to look this one up.
Look up McHale and Usher, 1976,
okay.
And they did that experiment, and it was a wet dry, and that would contrast what we're doing with Deamer. Deamer is entirely aqueous.
Right, but then if that works, then that could be, you know, it begs the question then, you know, how does the sodium, potassium, lithium, and, you know, ammonia, I mean, because then you get clean result, right? Just one product. It should be off of that.
What I just want to point out is, you know, if you are working off the AMP and the UMP, which is the 5' phosphate, if I understand it right.
Yeah.
If you make a cyclic compound, you make a 3' 5' cyclophosphate, which is not that conducive to opening up as a 2' 3' cyclic phosphate. The 6-membered cyclophosphates are quite difficult to open up for polymerization.
Can I step in a little bit here? So what we know about reactions of this kind that mediate phosphoryl transfer in we don't know much about the deoxy series, but we know quite a lot about the ribose series. So if you start with a 5' phosphate in the ribose series, then what seems to happen is you drive an equilibrium to remove the phosphate from the 5' position and re-equilibrate that phosphate throughout the available oxygens, so 5, 2, and 3. When you put it in a 2 or a 3' position, you rapidly see it cyclize, which leads to a kinetic trap. So I would ask David, does he analyze the bulk material he gets back? And does he know, and if that's monomer rather than the polymer that is pulling out of these reactions through manipulating the RNA with his gels, etc. Does he know what form he gets that monomer back in? Because I would expect him to get the vast majority of it back as 2,3 cyclic phosphates rather than 5 phosphates.
Possible. Yes, the point is that if we took the leftover, the remaining mononucleotides, that they would in fact be in these cyclized forms if we looked for that. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so, and I would expect them to be exclusively in the 2', 3' form, not the 3', 5' form. It's quite difficult to kinetically. It's quite difficult to form the 3', 5' phosphodiester due to the size of the ring and steric hindrance in forming that ring. Whereas the 3', 2' phosphodiester bond is very.
You mean cyclic phosphate? Matt, you mean cyclic phosphate?
Yes, cyclic. I'm talking cyclic phosphates here.
Yeah. So I think it's well worth us trying to analyze the leftovers, as you say. We also want to look for how much depurination has occurred, because we do see a little bit of.
I was going to ask if that was a problem.
Yeah, there's a little bit. It's not as though it all depurinates, but there's some that comes off. Really, just a few percent that we can see by TLC analysis. So I think it's well worth our trying to answer your question, which I might be able to do just with some very simple TLC as opposed to anything else that we might want to try to do with that. So it's a good point. Both of you, however, I point out, are probably arguing from solution chemistry at ordinary temperatures.
No, I'm talking about, so I've done lots of work with, I didn't talk about any of my work today, but we've done lots of work with dried down, so taking solutions of ribonucleotides and nucleosides and drying them down into melts and understanding how we can transfer phosphates in that context. So I'm talking exclusively from a dry down melt perspective.
Under those conditions, when you analyze, you see that the phosphate has moved around on the oxygens, and in fact,
it would appear that the loss of or the transfer of phosphate is a dissociative process. Okay, so that the phosphate is removed from the initial phosphodiester bond, phosphomonoester bond before it's deposited on another, which is what we think prohibits the formation of 3', 5' bonds. Whereas then we think you have a slight mechanistic switch when you move to generating a cyclic 2,3 phosphate, because there's a massively increased effective molarity of the electrophile and the nucleophile.
Right. Okay, that's a very good comment. Thank you for it.
Anyone else? Hearing none, I'm going to try and, Dave, regain control of this conference. I'm now the presenter. I want to begin to wrap up, and I have several things I want to say to sort of different people. First, to the grantees, the 3 teams. I have a website, I think you know. It's not hit very often, but I want to, it's sort of my memory, that website. And I'd like to make an entry into that website recording today's meeting that's extremely short. So I'd like to, perhaps in 3 or 4 sentences for each of the projects, describe what you described to me today, and I may be getting back to you for your help in putting that very short summary together. So you'll be hearing from me by email over the next few days about what that short summary for each of the 3 projects might be. And then on a different subject, for the reviewers, could I hope to hear from you, Irene, Nick, and Ram, say within a week? Hello?
Yes. So you'd like some written comments or some feedback? Okay.
Exactly, yes. I'm hoping within a week, and if I hear from you, from the 3 of you, or a joint communique from all 3 of you, then I'd get back to the grantees probably within 10 days. So you should all hear from me, I would say, before mid-July, so that we can proceed on. And then, let's see. I guess I want to conclude from my side with this. Several of you have been very kind to me in your comments about providing financial support, and I'm happy to do that. I want you to know that I feel indebted to you. This, to me, is the most exciting game in town. I don't know of a more important and yet soluble, difficult chemical problem out there. I mean, I guess there's the origin of the universe, which isn't chemistry. There's curing cancer, and there's some other big things too. But is there another problem that's out there that's huge, but is also soluble? And I think soluble by good old-fashioned chemistry. So I find this infinitely fascinating. I'm indebted to you. I'm serious about that. I can see why you're excited about it. I'm excited about it, and yet I'm a very, very small contributor to it. So I thank you one and all. I think the exchange we've had after the presentations today have been useful as well. I think we've all learned something, and that's all I have to say. Anyone else want to make some final comments?
Sure. I think I speak for all of us saying that this is a very successful way to have a research conference. Certainly beats hopping on a plane and flying for several hours and giving away several days of our lives to enjoy this kind of a conversation. I've learned from it, and you've learned from it, and I'm sure that all of the other people have as well.
Great.
Anyone else? Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say I agree with Dave completely on that.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Lost your sound, Barry.
Sorry, I think maybe you didn't hear, but I didn't have my microphone on. The thing has been recorded, and I will be sending you the recording by email sometime next week, I presume. And unless someone else has a comment, I'm going to sign off. Anyone else?
Oh, no,
Thank
no,
you,
thank
Xray.
you.
Then goodbye for now to you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Dave, thanks for the whole Deamer team, Veronica, Wenonah, and Hussein. Thanks to you all. So bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.